All right, hello there, Redwood A pushers. Picking up where we left off. So, last chapter, in chapter 5, we had the American Revolution, and now we have a country. Which is nice because now we can say the United States and Americans. So, that's a sigh of relief for us. Okay, at the beginning of the country after the Revolution, even before the Revolution had formally ended, and with the Treaty of Paris, we have the Articles of Confederation that was drafted, was approved by representatives from the different states. And basically, what the Articles of Confederation was think of it as like a loose affiliation of friends, essentially. And so there's no strong central government. They're kind of on the honor system in many ways. Each state had one vote, which, as you can imagine, if each person has one vote, that can make it kind of difficult to get stuff done. States really remain sovereign, meaning that they continue to have power within themselves, and there's no overarching kind of federal government or parent government, if you will, to look over them and kind of put them in check. So we have a lot of kind of squabbling, kind of sibling rivalry between the two, or between the 13 different states. Some things that were wrong with Articles of Confederation, and that's what we really want to focus on, because obviously it's going to get thrown out and replaced by the actual Constitution. Congress was not given the ability to tax, and I should say the Articles of Confederation was basically just a Congress. It did not have an executive branch, it didn't have a president, it didn't have a judicial system, a judiciary either. So it was just more of a legislative body, so kind of like a Congress. So they could not levy taxes or raise taxes, therefore they could not effectively pay off their debt that they had incurred over the Revolution. And so that's going to be a problem. We do see southern states paying their debt back first, as opposed to northern states, and that's going to be a point of contention later. And the central government, again, this Articles of Confederation that does exist, the states, if they disagree with them, they don't like what they're saying, they'd pretty much just say, screw you. We're not going to listen. We're going to continue to do our own thing. So states really, as I said, sibling rivalry goes on, and they distrust each other. There's also economic chaos as prices are rising, debts increase, debts weren't paid. If you were a Pennsylvania farmer and you went to sell your goods in Virginia didn't have the same currency as you, so you would be kind of out of luck in that situation. So basically, just remember the Articles of Confederation was the first attempt at government. It failed, and it's going to be replaced by the actual Constitution. So here's Mr. Vieira to continue.
All right, so there's a couple of rebellions that we're going to cover in this chapter, and we're going to be brief and really focus on not so much what happened, but why it's relevant. So the first is Shays Rebellion. And ultimately what happened was the economic chaos that was created by the Articles of Confederation and the general lack of a central federal government leads to this revolt in Massachusetts. A guy by the name of Daniel Shays leads an assault on a courthouse. What he wants is the state governments to help with farmers paying their debt because they were just drowning in debt. So they start to attack tax collectors, and they really sort of harness this spirit of 1776. They feel like this is a second revolution, and the rebellion spreads. Now, it's going to be shut down. Several men will be imprisoned. Daniel Shays will be arrested and thrown in jail. He's eventually going to be pardoned. But why Shays Rebellion is really significant is that it shows that the federal government, that the central government of the United States of America is not working. And that this economic chaos that's taking place, the fact that the states can't really control their citizens, they can't really control their economies, proves that there needed to be some oversight of the state governments. And in the opinion of the leaders of several of the really important states, they're going to need change. So again, Shays Rebellion, relevant because it shows the need for a stronger central government. And that will lead to the Constitutional Convention. So we're going to kind of go back and forth here between myself and Mr. Eskridge, but here he is again.
All right, hey guys. Okay, so the Constitutional Convention comes about because leaders throughout the 13 different states realize that the Articles of Confederation just is not working. It's not effective in taxing. It's not effective in producing a common currency. Although Washington did send troops and put down Shays Rebellion, it was kind of difficult to get an armed force there quickly to put down this internal rebellion. And so leaders in the 13 different states met and in Philadelphia in the summer of 1786 or 1787, excuse me, with the main goal of kind of reworking the Articles of Confederation, trying to fix these issues, these problems that it had. As you read about in your reading, James Madison has a completely different plan. He produces this really detailed research project over the course of a couple of years, in which he looks at different republics around the world. And what his plan is basically to do is to just scrap the entire Articles of Confederation and come up with something completely new and original, and something that he sees would actually address these problems, these shortcomings of the Articles of Confederation. Okay, so we have 55 delegates. These are known kind of in our American icons as the Founding Fathers. Characteristically, they're mostly young, mostly wealthy elites in their 30s, mid 30s, late 30s, early 40s. Again, they agree to quickly scrap the Articles of Confederation after hearing Madison's argument. Some people are reluctant to do so, but they decide, hey, let's give it a go. Some issues do arise during that convention, and we start to see different factions within the convention start to kind of coalesce or start to group into two camps. And so we have the Virginia Plan, as proposed by Madison, in which there would be the three branches of government, so the legislative, executive, and judicial branch, with the power to act differently, with different responsibilities. And they would also kind of put a check on each other. And again, as we go through these ideas, we're going to see them in the Enlightenment thinkers have proposed these ideas. So it's nothing really new. It's just putting all these Enlightenment ideas together. That's going to be the new thing. And then as opposed to the Virginia Plan, we have the New Jersey Plan, or the Joycey Plan, which really favored, as New Jersey is a much smaller state than Virginia, is going to favor kind of like a stronger Congress, and really, they're trying to get their voice heard, and they don't want to be silenced by larger populous states like Virginia, Pennsylvania, New York, et cetera. And so that's the New Jersey Plan, which establishes a bicameral system, or two house Congress, with the Senate being the upper house, with each state has two senators. They can vote independently, and then the House of Representatives is based on representation, and that's the lower house, and they have a little bit less control. So that's pretty much where we are. But kind of just note that at this convention, we're starting to see these divisions. Another thing to note is the importance of the Three-Fifths Compromise. And so we do have the institution of slavery written into the document. And so the institution of slavery is protected by the Constitution up to this point. And we also see that the foreign trade of importation of slaves would be end in 1808, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later on. But I'm going to turn it back to Mr. V for the rest.
All right, so I'm going to cover kind of the different political factions that are formed during this time period. You have the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists. The really important thing to note is that there was a group of individuals that felt that the Constitution as it is written was appropriate, strong enough document, and they want to push towards ratification. They want to push towards signing it, getting it into law, and carrying on the work of the government. That group was called the Federalists. The group in opposition to that, and who have more conservative views of the government's role in society, they believe that the Constitution really betrayed the whole reason that they had a revolution, being that there was this strong central government that would be housed in, at the time, New York City, that would kind of limit the rights of the states and therefore the rights of the individual. So you begin to see these two factions. Now, we're going to stop short of calling these political parties, because they really weren't political parties in the modern sense, but they're groups of the Founding Fathers who are debating these ideas and debating what should be the course of action. Alexander Hamilton, James Madison, and John Jay write a series of articles known as the Federalist Papers, in which they write these anonymously, but they support passage of the U.S. Constitution as it is written. Now, the Anti-Federalists are going to be strong voices, and we will have ratification, but not without some more compromise.
All right, hey guys, we're back, and I just wanted to give you a fun fact that President Grover Cleveland did not die while in office. Okay, so picking up with the Bill of Rights. So the Bill of Rights is ratified, added to the Constitution in 1791. as you saw in the reading, and I think they've discussed it in the last chapter, there were some states that were reluctant to approve the document. The document being the Constitution, if it did not contain a Bill of Rights. We have people on the Federalist side that are arguing that the Constitution already protects those things already. Anti-Federalists and smaller states are kind of saying, well, they're kind of weary and they want the Constitution to include protections such as freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom of the press, separation of church and state, the right to a trial by jury, right to property, all these kinds of things. So we do see another kind of not the first, but another compromise with the Bill of Rights. And so the first 10 amendments are added to the Constitution pretty much right off the bat after the document was ratified. And just some things to note, although we do have the Bill of Rights and we typically think of like, oh, those are great, it's awesome, we're the country that has those, yay, go us. It's important to note that within the Constitution, we don't see special protections or voice given to women. They continue to be marginalized during this time, as we saw with Abigail Adams writing her husband John last week when we looked at the Remember Ladies pieces. We also see suffrage or voting rights still restricted to landowning white males. So we have more suffrage, yes. More people can vote, more people can participate in the political process, but we still don't have women, and we still don't have a lot of non-landowning white men as well. And then also very important is slavery continues. And slavery, as I mentioned, is condoned by the Constitution. It's within the Constitution in multiple places. And so the Bill of Rights, all of these protections did not apply to women, did not apply to African Americans, i.e. enslaved persons. All right, so I'm going to turn it back to Mr. Vieira, who's going to continue with discussion about Hamilton.
Okay, so we're going to talk about money. Alexander Hamilton is the first Secretary of Treasury, and really, he is one of the main shot callers at the founding of this country. The first president of the United States is George Washington, but in a lot of ways, George Washington's presidency is really Alexander Hamilton's presidency. So Hamilton is convinced that the most powerful incentive of human actions is their self-interest. And his fear is that the wealthy and the elite will not have a vested interest in the federal government, and therefore it will fail. And so what he tries to do with the process known as assumption is to get the federal government to purchase the debt that the states had. So that way it would make the wealthy and the states want the federal government to succeed. Because if it doesn't succeed, then they're going to lose out on all the debt that they held. That's assumption in a nutshell. And so it says on the slide, the more money the government owed, the more people would want it to succeed, which is kind of a really complex economic idea broken down for you guys. Now, Hamilton gets this passed by Congress, even though many in the conservative side of the country do not want that to be the case. But now the U.S. government is going to have debt, and they're going to have to try and find a way to raise money to pay off some of that debt. Hamilton taxes whiskey. Now, part of the problem with taxing whiskey is that it's incredibly profitable for grain farmers to sell their grain to whiskey distillers to make money. It's actually the most profitable business at the time. And so this leads to, again, another rebellion, this one aptly known as the Whiskey Rebellion. What ends up happening is farmers in Pennsylvania are furious over this excise tax on whiskey that they have to pay. They're losing money. They think that it's unfair. They think that the federal government is not looking out for their best interests. And so in that Enlightenment spirit and the spirit of 1776 again, they rebel. They stop some tax collectors. A couple guys are tarred and feathered, which is way worse than it sounds. Because when you're tarred and feathered, your skin is basically burnt off, and then you look like a chicken, which is an embarrassing way to die. But in kind of a, macho, cool thing, George Washington becomes the one and only American president to actually lead troops into battle while he's president. And so if you can imagine George Washington on his horse, there's the painting there. He leads his troops into battle and quickly puts down the rebellion. Now, again, the rebellion is important for what it shows. And what the Whiskey Rebellion shows us through our historical lens is that the federal government was working. and that the federal government was the power in the nation at the time. This won't be something that's put down by local power or by the state power. It's the U.S. Army, led by the President of the United States. So it really shows the force and teeth that the federal government has.
All right, hey guys. So I'm going to discuss a little bit about foreign policy. So this fits into our theme, America and the world. And so we start to see this young nation start to reach out and try to deal with foreign powers. Pretty quickly, colonists realize that the world is increasingly becoming a more globalized sphere, and that trade with other countries is really important. And so we have a number of things going on. And something that was happening is that after the American Revolution, if you remember, Britain and France fought against each other during the Revolution. And that war continued to go on. And so a lot of it was fought on the seas. And so we have the British are impressing American sailors into service. So basically, they would take over a ship and say, okay, now you are sailing with the British Royal Navy. You are forced to fight for us now. And that's a thing that really scared a lot of Americans. Americans were fearful, and rightfully so, that trade would be interrupted, that they weren't safe on the world's oceans. And so we have John Jay, who's also serving as the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, goes to France and makes a treaty. Goes to Britain. Sorry, makes a treaty with the British, and basically the United States gets some concessions. They do not in impressment, however, but they do get some concessions that you can read more about. We also see that what that starts to do with Jay's treaty is we start to see the Federalists kind of start to go against what will be known as Jeffersonian Republicans. Sorry. So we're starting to get a little more political parties. And again, we're not going to say that we have political parties yet, but we're starting to see that shift towards it. We also have foreign relations with France in the XYZ affair, in which X, Y, and Z are U.S. officials. And basically the French say, we're not going to deal with you unless you give us a bribe. And that comes back to the Americans, and Americans are really ticked off about it, say that they're being insulted by the French. And so we have some Americans that are saying, we need to go to war against the French. Adams knows and sees that the United States is not ready for that, and so signs a treaty with France. Avoiding a potentially devastating war.
All right, guys, Mr. Vera back. Part 3 of Chapter 6. We're just going to cover a couple quick points here, and then we'll wrap this up. So in you can start to see, and hopefully you're seeing this narrative of political factions and ideologies kind of at war with one another. Not literal war, in the courts, war in government. And so one of the facts is that most of the people who immigrated to the United States in the real beginnings of the nation, many of the immigrants became Democratic Republicans, or Republicans as they were just more commonly referred to at the time. And so in order for the Federalists to kind of seize control and seize power, they're going to try and push through a series of laws that are really going to be directed particularly at Thomas Jefferson and Thomas Jefferson's Republican Party. And so the first one is the Naturalization Act. The Naturalization Act says that you're not a citizen of the United States until you've lived in the country for 14 years, not 5. This is a direct shot at immigrant groups that come over that typically had supported Thomas Jefferson. The Alien and Sedition Acts are really kind of a test case for the First Amendment. The Alien Act said that the president could deport anyone that he felt was dangerous. Now, this gives far-reaching authority to the executive branch, and obviously many of the Republicans are going to see this as just a way for Adams and the Federalist Party to get rid of their supporters, of the Jeffersonian supporters. The Sedition Act allows the government to basically arrest anybody and prosecute them for anything that is false, scandalous, or malicious against the government. And these acts are obviously unconstitutional. They violate your First Amendment protections, and they're going to be ruled unconstitutional, but they're incredibly popular with the public. And so popular, in fact, that an actual Republican congressman is arrested under the Sedition Act. So you can kind of see the political powers testing the limits of this new government. And so, as they're testing the limits of the new government, the Supreme Court is really going to become crucial because it is going to dictate essentially what the government can do and what the government can't do. And that's where we're going to finish this off. So, I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Eskridge, and we'll talk a little bit about the Supreme Court.
All right, so we have what is kind of known as the Revolution of 1800, and it's not really revolutionary in any real sense. It's called a Revolution of 1800 by Thomas Jefferson because it was a pretty peaceful revolution. As the power transferred from Adams to Jefferson, and although it seems peaceful, there were a couple things that did kind of bring some interesting issues and set some precedents for the nation that we'll continue to deal with today. Okay, so one of the things that happens is what becomes known as Marbury versus Madison, and the case is really important because it establishes this idea of judicial review. And so basically what judicial review says is that the Supreme Court and other courts have the ability to say what the law is. So the Supreme Court has the ability, and other courts have the ability to say that presidential acts and congressional legislation are determine whether they're constitutional or not, whether they violate the Constitution. And so we see that quote here with Justice John Marshall saying it is emphatically the province and duty of the judicial department to say what the law is. So basically, in that he's saying that the Supreme Court, it is up to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court is given the power to say what the law is. And so that's really important. And we continue to see that precedent all the way through American history up to this day, where Supreme Court is looked at to decide these really sometimes controversial issues and really important issues. We see it in Roe v. Wade. We see it in numerous different aspects moving through the country. So just remember that that idea of judicial review as established by Marbury versus Madison. But yeah, so the Supreme Court and the judicial branch is given a lot of power. So we're seeing all of the branches really starting to kind of exercise themselves and test their limits and test kind of each other as well. And so that's going to just play out in this beautiful American story that we'll continue to look at for the rest of the year. All right, have a great weekend, and we'll see you on Monday.